The scissors made that sickening crunch as they sliced through Haley Morrison's blonde hair, chunks falling onto the polished gymnasium floor, while 30 girls watched in horrified silence. What had started as routine cheer tryouts at Connecticut's most elite prep school would end with handcuffs, federal investigations, and the complete destruction of a 200-year-old institution built on protecting the powerful. They thought cutting down a scholarship girl would be just another Tuesday afternoon power play. They had no idea they'd just created their own executioner. If you've ever felt powerless in the face of institutional cruelty, if you've watched injustice hide behind privilege and donations, this story might feel familiar. Maybe you've lived through something similar, or know someone who has. The details might be different, but the feeling of being targeted, isolated, and expected to stay silent, that's universal. So many of us carry these stories, and maybe it's time we started sharing them. Riverside Preparatory Academy sat like a Gothic monument to old money and older traditions in the heart of Fairfield County, where hedge fund fortunes built family legacies and zip codes determined destinies. Founded in 1822 by railroad barons who needed somewhere to educate their sons away from the common rabble. The school had evolved over 2 centuries into a co-educational fortress where America's elites sent their children to network, dominate, and learn that rules were suggestions for people who couldn't afford to ignore them. Haley Morrison had never imagined she'd walk these hallowed halls lined with oil paintings of dead white men in military uniforms. 6 months ago, she'd been planning to finish her senior year at Bridgeport Public High, working weekend shifts at her aunt's diner to help with family expenses and practicing her dance routines in their apartment's cramped living room. Then her father's landscaping business had landed the contract to maintain Riverside Prep's sprawling 30-acre campus, and everything changed. Full scholarship, her dad had said, waving the letter with trembling hands that still bore soil under the nails despite 3 showers. Academic and athletic merit. They want you for their dance program and maybe cheerleading. Haley, this is your ticket out. Out of what? Exactly. Had never been explicitly stated, but they all knew, out of wondering if the electricity would get shut off again, out of choosing between gas money and groceries, out of the cycle that kept working-class families grinding just to survive, while others accumulated wealth like autumn leaves. Now, 8 weeks into her senior year at Riverside Prep, Haley understood why the opportunity had felt too good to be true. It was. The morning of October 15th had started with the usual routine, waking up at 5:30 a.m. to catch 2 buses across town. Since her family's beat up, Honda couldn't make the daily round trip without risking a breakdown they couldn't afford to fix. She'd perfected the art of looking like she belonged among the Teslas and BMWs in the student parking lot, even though she emerged from a wheezing city bus that wheezed diesel fumes and carried workers heading to service jobs in the wealthy suburbs. Her uniform was regulation perfect navy blazer pressed, white shirt starched, plaid skirt hemmed to the exact length specified in the student handbook. But no amount of careful preparation could disguise the fact that her blazer came from the school's loaner closet for students who couldn't afford the $300 authentic version, or that her shoes were last season's Target knockoffs of the designer loafers everyone else wore. The morning had been typical in its low-level hostility: snide comments about her bus arrival, pointed questions about her father's landscaping work, delivered with air quotes and smirks, and the constant reminder that she was an outsider in a world built on exclusion. But Haley had survived worse. She'd learned to keep her head down, focus on her grades, and count the days until graduation would free her from this gilded prison. What she hadn't anticipated was Brock Whitfield, at 6'3", with the kind of golden boy looks that belonged on recruitment posters. Brock was Riverside Prep royalty, star quarterback, National Honor Society president, and heir to a pharmaceutical fortune that had built hospitals and endowed university wings. His family had attended Riverside for 4 generations, and his father sat on the board of trustees. More importantly, he was dating Savannah Cross, the cheerleading captain whose own family tree included senators and Supreme Court justices. Together, they ruled the school's social hierarchy with the casual cruelty that came from never experiencing consequences. They were beautiful, wealthy, and utterly convinced of their own superiority, a combination that made them as dangerous as they were untouchable. Or so they believed, The cheer tryouts had been Haley's idea of a fresh start, despite everything. She loved to dance, loved the athletic precision and artistic expression that cheerleading could provide when done right. She'd been captain of Bridgeport High's squad, had won regional competitions, and thought maybe, just maybe, excellence could overcome prejudice. She should have known better. The gymnasium at Riverside Prep looked like something from a movie about elite athletics. Polished hardwood floors reflected overhead lights that cost more than most families' cars, while state-of-the-art sound systems and professional-grade video equipment captured every routine for analysis and recruitment videos. The school's championship banners hung from the vaulted ceiling like prayer flags to athletic supremacy, and the retractable bleachers could seat 800 spectators for the packed games, where scouts from Ivy League schools came hunting for their next generation of scholar athletes. 30 girls had shown up for tryouts, but everyone knew the real competition was for the 3 spots that would open up when seniors graduated. The existing squad, led by Savannah Cross and her inner circle of trust fund princesses, watched from the sidelines with the cold calculation of apex predators evaluating potential threats. Haley had worn her lucky leotard royal blue with silver accents that had cost her 3 weeks of diner shifts, but made her feel confident and strong. She'd spent hours perfecting her routine, incorporating elements from contemporary dance that would set her apart from the standard cheerleading playbook. When her music started, she let everything else disappear and simply moved. For 3 minutes and 47 seconds, the gymnasium belonged to her. Her routine was flawless, powerful tumbling passes that showcased years of gymnastics training, fluid transitions that demonstrated her dance background, and an energy that transformed the entire space. Even the existing squad members couldn't hide their impressed expressions as Haley landed combination after combination with precision that made their own routines look amateurish by comparison. When the music ended and she struck her final pose, the silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then scattered applause began, growing stronger as even the most skeptical observers recognized extraordinary talent when they saw it. "Well," said Coach Rebecca Sterling, a former Olympic gymnast, whose reputation for brutal honesty was legendary among Riverside Prep athletes, "that was exceptional." Haley felt her heart soar. Maybe this was it. Maybe merit could overcome prejudice after all. That's when Brock Whitfield appeared. He shouldn't have been in the gymnasium. During girls' tryouts, school policy clearly prohibited male students from observing cheerleading auditions to prevent exactly the kind of inappropriate behavior that was about to unfold. But rules had never applied to Brock Whitfield, and apparently, neither did basic human decency. "Savannah, babe," he called out, his voice carrying across the gym with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "Can we talk?" All eyes turned to watch the golden couple's interaction. Brock strode across the floor in his leather jacket and perfectly distressed jeans that cost more than Haley's monthly bus pass, his expensive sneakers squeaking against the polished wood. Savannah met him halfway, her platinum blonde hair catching the overhead lights like a halo, as she tilted her head to listen to whatever he was whispering in her ear. Haley couldn't hear the conversation, but she watched Savannah's expression change from confusion to understanding to something darker. The cheerleading captain's ice blue eyes swept across the assembled tryout candidates before settling on Haley with laser focus. "Ladies," Savannah announced, her voice carrying the kind of polished authority that came from generations of breeding and finishing school training. "We're going to take a short break. Everyone except new candidates can hit the locker room for water and snacks." The existing squad members filed out obediently, leaving behind only the tryout hopefuls and a handful of coaches who seemed suddenly interested in checking their phones or organizing equipment rather than paying attention to what was happening on the gymnasium floor. Haley felt the first prickle of unease as the vast space emptied around them, leaving 15 girls standing awkwardly in the middle of the hardwood expanse, while Brock Whitfield positioned himself near the sound system controls like he owned the place, which, technically, his family kind of did. "So," Savannah continued, her smile sharp enough to cut glass, "I want to talk about standards." The word hung in the air like a threat, and Haley felt every instinct screaming at her to run bite it. But she was trapped by pride, by hope, by the desperate belief that if she could just be good enough, work hard enough, prove herself enough, then maybe she could earn her place in this rarefied world. Riverside Prep cheerleading isn't just about athletic ability, Savannah explained, beginning to pace in front of the assembled candidates like a general addressing troops. We represent the finest educational institution in Connecticut. We perform at galas where foreign ambassadors attend. We entertain at alumni events where billion-dollar donations get decided. We are the face of excellence, tradition, and American achievement. Several girls nodded along enthusiastically, clearly buying into the narrative of cheerleading as some kind of patriotic duty. Haley remained still, watching Savannah's performance with growing dread, which means, the captain continued, that we need team members who understand their role, who respect the hierarchy, and who know their place in the greater ecosystem of Riverside Prep excellence. She stopped directly in front of Haley, close enough that the scent of expensive perfume mixed with hairspray created a cloying cloud between them. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering about the scholarship situation, Savannah said, her voice taking on a concerned, almost motherly tone that somehow made everything worse. We absolutely support diversity and inclusion here at Riverside. In fact, we think it's wonderful that the school administration has decided to experiment with need-based admissions. The word experiment landed like a slap, reducing Haley's presence to a laboratory test that could be terminated at any moment if the results proved unsatisfactory. But, Savannah continued, we also need to be realistic about what that means for team dynamics. Cheerleading requires expensive equipment, travel for competitions, fundraising commitments, and social obligations that can be challenging. For students from different backgrounds, Haley's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was a test, clearly designed to provoke a reaction that could be used to justify her exclusion. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. For example, Brock interjected from his position near the sound system, his voice carrying across the gym with casual cruelty. Our winter formal is at the Fairfield Country Club. Members only. The dress code alone probably costs more than some people make in a month. A few girls giggled nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation but too intimidated to speak up. Haley felt heat rising in her cheeks but maintained her composure through sheer force of will. And spring break training camp in Bermuda added another existing squad member who had somehow materialized during the break. 7 days at a 5-star resort. Not exactly food stamp accessible. The laughter was louder this time. Meaner. As the group dynamics shifted toward pack behavior, Haley recognized the pattern from nature documentaries, predators isolating their prey before moving in for the kill. But hey, Brock said, his grin widening as he warmed to his theme. I'm sure Daddy's lawnmower business is doing great. Maybe he can trim some hedges to pay for pom-poms. That crossed a line, and Haley felt something snap inside her chest. Her father worked 16-hour days in all weather to keep his small business afloat, providing landscape services that kept places like Riverside Prep looking picture-perfect for prospective families and donors. He was honest, hardworking, and more honorable than anyone in this gymnasium, and she wasn't about to let some trust fund sociopath mock him for having the audacity to earn his living with his hands. My father, she said clearly, her voice cutting through the nervous laughter like a blade, is an honest businessman who provides a service your family clearly values. Since you hired him to maintain your grounds, I'm here because I earned it academically and athletically, not because my last name appears on buildings. The gymnasium went dead silent. Brock's expression shifted from amusement to surprise, to something darker as he processed the fact that the scholarship girl had just publicly called out his behavior in front of witnesses. In his world, people like Haley Morrison were supposed to know their place, accept insults with grateful silence, and certainly never, ever talk back to their betters. Interesting, he said softly, and Haley felt every survival instinct she possessed start screaming danger signals. You know what? Savannah interjected smoothly, clearly recognizing that the situation was spiraling beyond casual cruelty into potential incident territory. Let's get back to tryouts. I think we've covered the important points about team culture and expectations, but Brock wasn't ready to let it go. He'd been publicly challenged by someone he considered beneath notice, and his fragile ego couldn't tolerate the wound to his carefully cultivated image of untouchable superiority. Actually, he said, moving away from the sound system and walking slowly toward the group of candidates. I think there's one more thing we need to address. Coach Sterling looked up from her clipboard for the first time since the break had started, finally seeming to register that something was happening that deserved her attention. But she didn't intervene, didn't assert authority, didn't do anything except watch with the kind of passive complicity that enabled institutional cruelty. See? The thing is, Brock continued, circling around behind the group of girls like a shark, scenting blood. Cheerleading isn't just about individual performance. It's about fitting in, being part of something bigger than yourself, understanding that sometimes you need to take direction from people who know better. He stopped directly behind Haley, close enough that she could feel his presence like a cold shadow, air muscles tensed. Every instinct telling her to move, to run, to get away from whatever was about to happen. And I'm getting the feeling, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire gymnasium, that our scholarship friend here might have some problems with authority. That's when she felt his hands in her hair. It happened so fast that for a moment, Haley's brain couldn't process what was occurring. Strong fingers twisted into her carefully styled blonde ponytail, yanking her head back at an angle that sent pain shooting down her neck. She tried to pull away, but his grip was iron-strong and positioned to cause maximum discomfort if she resisted. "Let go of me," she gasped, reaching up to grab his wrists and try to break free from the hold that was making her eyes water. "I don't think so," Brock replied conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather, instead of him physically restraining a female classmate in front of 30 witnesses. "See, I think you need to learn some respect. And lucky for you, I'm an excellent teacher." The metallic snick of scissors opening echoed through the silent gymnasium like a gunshot. Haley's blood turned to ice as she realized what was about to happen. She tried to twist away, tried to break free. But Brock's athletic training gave him advantages in strength and leverage that made resistance futile. All she could do was watch in the reflection of the polished floor as the scissors moved toward her hair. "Stop," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "This is assault. You can't." "I can do whatever I want," Brock interrupted, his tone matter-of-fact rather than angry, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "My family built half this school. My father signs the paychecks. And you? You're a charity case who forgot her place." The first cut took 6 inches off her ponytail, in one savage slice. Blonde hair fell to the gymnasium floor like golden snow, while Haley fought back tears of rage and humiliation. Around them, 30 girls stood frozen in shock, their phones recording everything, but no one moving to intervene or call for help. "There we go," Brock said pleasantly, releasing his grip on what remained of her hair and stepping back to admire his handiwork. "Much better. Now you look more appropriate for someone in your position." Haley spun around to face him, her hands flying to the ragged edges where her ponytail used to be, years of careful growth, ruined in seconds by a psychopath with scissors and an ego problem. "You're insane," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and fury. "This is criminal assault. I'm calling the police." Brock laughed, actually laughed at the threat, as if the idea of facing consequences for his actions was the most absurd thing he'd ever heard. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing to the assembled witnesses with theatrical flair. "Call whoever you want. Tell them Brock Whitfield cut your hair during cheerleading tryouts. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about how you violently resisted when I was simply trying to help you adjust your appearance to meet team standards." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of the other candidates and existing squad members. The message was clear. This was their story now, and anyone who contradicted it would face similar treatment. "Besides," he continued, pulling out his own phone and showing her the screen, "I've got plenty of video evidence showing you attacking me first." Funny how camera angles can make things look so different from reality. Haley stared at the doctored footage on his phone, watching herself appear to lunge at him while he defended himself with the scissors. The editing was professional quality, the kind of sophisticated manipulation that money could buy from experts who specialized in creating alternative versions of reality. "You edited that?" she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew how weak they sounded. Who would believe the scholarship girl over the quarterback whose family name appeared on half the buildings in town? Prove it, Brock replied with a shrug. But first, maybe you should worry about more immediate problems. He gestured toward the gymnasium entrance, where Principal Victoria Hartwell was approaching with the determined stride of someone who'd been summoned to deal with a situation that was threatening the school's carefully maintained image. Principal Hartwell was everything Riverside Prep represented in human form, impeccably dressed, coldly professional, and utterly committed to protecting the institution's reputation at any cost. In her 15 years as headmistress, she'd weathered scandals that would have destroyed lesser schools by deploying the same strategy every time: deny, deflect, and destroy anyone who threatened the narrative of Riverside Prep excellence. What exactly is going on here? She demanded, her sharp gaze taking in the scattered hair on the floor, Haley's disheveled appearance, and the circle of shocked witnesses holding their phones. Nothing serious, Brock said smoothly, slipping his phone back into his pocket with practiced ease. Just a little disagreement about tryout procedures. Haley here got a bit emotional about some feedback, and things escalated. The principal's eyes narrowed as she processed the scene, clearly calculating risks and potential damage to the school's reputation. Her gaze lingered on Haley's ruined hair, the physical evidence that something significant had occurred, before shifting to the assembled witnesses who were still recording everything on their phones. I see, she said finally, and I suppose everyone here witnessed this. Disagreement? The question was posed innocently enough, but everyone in the room understood what was really being asked. Whose version of events would become official record? Whose family had the power to determine consequences? Whose future would be sacrificed to maintain the status quo? Actually, said a voice from the back of the group, clear and steady despite the obvious fear behind it, I think we should probably tell the truth about what happened here. Every head turned to stare at Emma Rodriguez, a sophomore whose father was a prominent civil rights attorney and whose mother served on the Connecticut State Board of Education. She held her phone up, showing the clear video she'd captured of the entire incident from start to finish. See, the thing is, Emma continued, her voice gaining strength as she realized she had evidence that couldn't be edited or explained away. I recorded everything, from the moment Brock grabbed her hair until right now, and I already uploaded it to 3 different cloud services, so even if someone tries to confiscate my phone or delete the files, copies will still exist. The gymnasium fell silent except for the sound of 30 people breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Principal Hartwell's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, while Brock's expression shifted from confident superiority to something approaching panic. Furthermore, Emma continued, clearly emboldened by the power shift her evidence had created. I've already sent copies to my mother, who sits on the state education board, and my father, who specializes in civil rights litigation, so this isn't going away quietly. No matter who tries to cover it up. Haley felt something that might have been hope beginning to bloom in her chest as she realized that not everyone at Riverside Prep was willing to stay silent in the face of injustice. But before she could fully process this development, her phone began buzzing with an incoming call. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice that answered when she hesitantly accepted the call was familiar from 100 news broadcasts. Miss Morrison, this is Janet Williams from Channel 8 News. We've received some very disturbing footage of an incident at your school, and we'd like to speak with you immediately. The color drained from Principal Hartwell's face as she realized that the situation had just escalated beyond anything the school's legal team or public relations consultants could contain. In the age of social media and viral videos, institutional cover-ups were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, especially when the evidence was as clear and damning as what Emma Rodriguez had captured. Now, let's all just calm down, the principal said, her voice taking on the kind of forced reasonableness that signaled desperation. I'm sure we can resolve this internally without involving outside parties. Perhaps we could all meet in my office and discuss this like civilized people. But Haley was done being civilized, done accepting that resolving things internally meant protecting perpetrators and silencing victims, done pretending that institutional authority deserved respect when it was wielded to enable cruelty. Actually, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, I think I'd prefer to resolve this publicly, with lawyers, journalists, and anyone else who wants to know how Riverside Prep really treats students who don't come from the right families. She looked directly at Brock, whose golden boy confidence had evaporated as he realized that his actions might actually have consequences for the first time in his privileged life. "You wanted to teach me about respect and knowing my place," she continued, pulling out her own phone and hitting record. "Well, consider this your education about what happens when you assault someone who refuses to stay quiet." The video call with the news reporter was still active, broadcasting their entire conversation to Channel 8's newsroom, where producers were already preparing to break into regular programming with developing news of a scandal at one of Connecticut's most prestigious private schools. This is Janet Williams reporting live from Riverside Preparatory Academy, where shocking footage has emerged of what appears to be a violent assault during cheerleading tryouts, and somewhere in his corner office overlooking the manicured campus grounds, Board Chairman Richard Whitfield, Brock's father, and one of the most powerful men in Connecticut, felt his phone start ringing with calls from reporters, lawyers, and concerned donors who were beginning to ask very uncomfortable questions about the culture his family had helped create at Riverside Prep. The war for the soul of an institution was about to begin, and Haley Morrison, the scholarship girl they'd tried to cut down to size, was about to teach them all a lesson about the price of underestimating someone who had nothing left to lose. Within 3 hours, number Riverside Prep assault was trending on every major social media platform. Emma Rodriguez's unedited footage had spread like wildfire across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, accumulating over 2 million views and sparking outrage from civil rights advocates, educational reform groups, and everyday Americans who recognize the ugly face of institutional privilege protecting predators. The video was impossible to spin, impossible to denny, and impossible to contain, showing in crystal clear detail a wealthy male student physically restraining a female classmate while deliberately cutting her hair as other students watched in horror. Haley sat in her family's modest living room, still wearing her tryout clothes with the ragged remnants of her once beautiful hair, watching her assault play out on national television while her phone buzzed non-stop with interview requests from reporters, support messages from strangers, and legal offers from attorneys who specialized in civil rights cases. This disturbing footage from Connecticut's Riverside Preparatory Academy raises serious questions about the culture of entitlement and abuse that may be flourishing at our nation's most elite educational institutions. CNN's Anderson Cooper was saying, his famous silver hair catching studio lights as he addressed the camera with barely controlled outrage. We're joined now by civil rights attorney Maya Patterson, who represents several families in similar cases. Maya, what legal options does this young woman have? Haley's mother, Susan Morrison, sat beside her daughter on their threadbare couch. Still in her hospital, scrubs from her double shift at Bridgeport General, gripping Haley's hand so tightly it almost hurt. When the first news van had pulled up outside their apartment building 2 hours ago, Susan had wanted to hide, to protect her family from the kind of attention that could destroy working-class lives. But watching her daughter's courage on national television had changed something fundamental in Susan Morrison's understanding of what was possible when ordinary people refused to accept extraordinary injustice. "We're getting calls from lawyers all over the country," Susan said, scrolling through the voicemails that had accumulated on their home phone. Pro bono offers, civil rights organizations, even some politician's office wanting to make a statement. Haley barely heard her mother's words. She was transfixed by the coverage, watching as news anchors and legal experts dissected every frame of Emma's video with the kind of serious analysis usually reserved for international conflicts or presidential scandals. For the first time in her life, her voice mattered. Her pain was being acknowledged. Her story was being heard by people who had the power to demand consequences. The doorbell rang, and Susan went to answer it, returning with a woman in an expensive charcoal suit whose presence immediately changed the energy in their modest living room. Alexandra Chen, not to be confused with any previous characters, was everything a high-powered civil rights attorney should be. Sharp, confident, and radiating the kind of controlled intensity that came from decades of fighting institutional power. "Miss Morrison," she said, extending a manicured hand to Haley, "I'm Alexandra Chen from the Civil Rights Defense Fund. I flew in from Washington the moment I saw the footage. We need to talk. Over the next hour, Alexandra explained the legal landscape that Haley now found herself navigating, Title IX violations for the school's failure to protect students from gender-based violence, civil rights violations under Section 1983 for institutional discrimination, potential criminal charges for assault and conspiracy, and most significantly, federal RICO implications if patterns of systematic abuse could be established at Riverside Prep. This isn't just about your case, Alexandra explained, pulling out a thick folder of documents. We've been investigating Riverside Prep for 3 years, following complaints from families who were silenced through intimidation and financial pressure. Your video is the smoking gun we needed to prove systematic institutional failure to protect students. She spread photographs across the Morrison family's coffee table, dozens of young faces representing students who had suffered at Riverside Prep over the years. Sexual assaults covered up to protect athletic programs. Racial harassment dismissed as misunderstandings. Financial aid students systematically targeted for humiliation and exclusion. A pattern of abuse so comprehensive that it constituted a federal civil rights conspiracy. Brock Whitfield isn't the disease, Alexandra continued. He's just the most visible symptom of a culture that has protected predators for generations. But your courage in refusing to stay silent has given us the opportunity to expose all of it. As if summoned by their conversation, Haley's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a familiar voice filled the speaker with barely contained panic. Haley, this is Principal Hartwell. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding about what happened today. Perhaps you and your family could come in tomorrow morning so we can discuss a resolution that works for everyone? Alexandra grabbed the phone, her expression sharpening like a predator scenting prey. Principal Hartwell. This is Alexandra Chen, Miss Morrison's legal counsel. Any further communication regarding this matter should be directed through my office, and I should inform you that this call is being recorded for legal purposes. The line went dead immediately. They're panicking, Alexandra said with satisfaction, which means they know exactly how much trouble they're in. Now let's talk about what we're going to do about it. Meanwhile, across town in the sprawling Whitfield estate that occupied 12 acres of Fairfield County's most exclusive real estate, Richard Whitfield was experiencing the first genuine crisis of his entitled life. As chairman of Riverside Prep's Board of Trustees and CEO of Whitfield Pharmaceuticals, he was accustomed to problems that could be solved with donations, legal threats, or strategic phone calls to well-placed friends in government and media. But this was different. This was his son, caught on camera, committing a violent assault that had already been viewed by millions of people worldwide. This was institutional liability that could cost him everything he'd spent decades building. This was the kind of scandal that destroyed family legacies and ended political ambitions. The video was everywhere. His crisis management consultant was saying, pacing across the marble floors of the Whitfield home office, while multiple televisions displayed coverage of the scandal. We've tried takedown requests, copyright claims, even hired bot farms to flood the hashtags with distraction content. Nothing's working. The story has taken on a life of its own. Richard Whitfield stared at the wall of his office, lined with photographs of himself shaking hands with senators, governors, and presidents, relationships built over decades of strategic donations and mutual back-scratching that were now potentially worthless if he couldn't contain the damage from his son's actions. What about the Morrison family, he asked. Surely they can be reasoned with. Everyone has a price. His lawyer, Patricia Hammond, one of the most expensive legal minds in Connecticut, shook her head grimly. I made preliminary contact through intermediaries. They've retained Alexandra Chen from the Civil Rights Defense Fund. She's the lawyer who brought down the Riverside Military Academy scandal in Virginia and the St. Augustine's cover-up in Maryland. She doesn't negotiate with institutional abusers, she destroys them. The older man felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized that his usual methods of problem-solving might be inadequate for the situation his family now faced. For the first time in his privileged life, Richard Whitfield was experiencing what it felt like to be powerless against forces beyond his control. His son Brock sat in the corner of the office, no longer the confident golden boy who had strutted through Riverside Prep's hallways like he owned them. The reality of consequences was beginning to penetrate his bubble of entitlement. and the experience was clearly traumatic for someone who had never been held accountable for anything in his 18 years of life. "I didn't think it would be a big deal," he mumbled, staring at his expensive sneakers. "It was just hair. She can grow it back." The statement revealed such a profound disconnect from reality that even his father seemed momentarily speechless. Richard Whitfield was many things: ruthless, manipulative, utterly selfish, but he wasn't stupid. He understood that his son had just confessed to committing assault, while demonstrating zero comprehension of why that might be problematic. "Brock," he said slowly, as if speaking to a particularly dim child, "you physically restrained a female classmate and cut her hair with scissors while 30 people recorded it on their phones. Do you understand that this constitutes criminal assault? Do you grasp that you've potentially destroyed our family's reputation and my business relationships?" But before Brock could respond, their crisis management meeting was interrupted by the sound of cars pulling into the circular driveway outside. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see black SUVs with government plates and federal law enforcement officers approaching the front door. "FBI," Patricia Hammond said, her face going pale as she recognized the implications. "They're not here to ask questions. They're here to execute search warrants." The next 6 hours transformed the Whitfield estate into a crime scene. Federal agents methodically searched every room, confiscated computers and phones, and interviewed family members separately while news helicopters circled overhead like vultures drawn to fresh carrion. The images of Brock Whitfield being led away in handcuffs, while his father shouted at FBI agents, became the defining visual of a scandal that was rapidly expanding beyond one incident at one school. Because Alexandra Chen had been right, Haley's case was just the beginning. Once the floodgates opened, other victims began coming forward with stories that painted a picture of systematic abuse at Riverside Prep, stretching back decades. Former students who had been sexually assaulted by faculty members, scholarship recipients who had been systematically harassed until they dropped out, families who had been financially destroyed for attempting to seek justice against the school's powerful donors. Emma Rodriguez, the brave sophomore who had recorded the original incident, found herself at the center of a media storm as other students began sharing their own evidence of institutional abuse. Her phone became a repository of screenshots, recordings, and documentation that revealed the true scope of Riverside Prep's culture of cruelty. "I've been collecting this stuff for 2 years," Emma explained to reporters gathered outside the school's gates, which had been closed by federal order pending investigation. Everyone knew what was happening, but nobody thought anyone would believe us if we spoke up. Haley changed that. She showed us that fighting back was possible. The domino effect was swift and devastating. Within 48 hours of Haley's assault going viral, 12 current and former students had filed federal civil rights complaints against Riverside Prep. The Connecticut State Attorney General had opened a criminal investigation into the school's handling of sexual assault allegations. The Department of Education had launched a formal Title IX investigation that threatened to strip the institution of federal funding eligibility. Most damaging of all, the IRS had begun auditing the school's tax-exempt status after whistleblowers revealed that massive donations from wealthy families had been used to silence victims and cover up crimes rather than support educational programs. Principal Victoria Hartwell resigned on Thursday morning, 3 days after the assault, as evidence emerged that she had personally orchestrated cover-ups of at least 17 separate incidents of student abuse over her tenure. Her resignation letter, leaked to the press within hours, was a masterpiece of non-apology that blamed outside agitators and misunderstood disciplinary procedures while accepting zero responsibility for the culture of institutional cruelty she had fostered. The school's board of trustees began resigning one by one as federal investigators revealed financial irregularities, personnel enrichment schemes, and a systematic pattern of using charitable donations to fund luxury lifestyles while students suffered abuse. Richard Whitfield, facing potential federal charges for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, was forced to step down from every board position he held while his pharmaceutical company's stock price collapsed amid revelations about his role in enabling institutional violence. But the most satisfying moment for Haley came on Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after her assault, when she received a phone call from someone she had never expected to hear from. "Miss Morrison, this is Savannah Cross. I wanted to apologize," The former cheerleading captain's voice was barely recognizable. Gone was the confident authority that had ruled Riverside Prep's social hierarchy, replaced by something that sounded like genuine remorse mixed with profound fear. "I know what I did was wrong," Savannah continued, "standing there and letting Brock hurt you, not speaking up, participating in the whole culture of cruelty. I was scared of losing my position, scared of being targeted myself. But that's no excuse. I enabled something terrible. And I'm sorry." Haley listened to the apology in silence, processing the transformation in someone who had seemed untouchable just days earlier. The federal investigation had revealed that Savannah herself had been a victim of systematic harassment and manipulation by older male students and faculty members, groomed from freshman year to maintain the school's culture of silence through a combination of privileges and threats. "I'm testifying against the school," Savannah added. "My family's lawyers tried to stop me, said it would hurt my college prospects and social standing, but after seeing what happened to you, after understanding what I've been part of, I can't stay silent anymore." The conversation lasted 20 minutes, and by the end, Haley found herself offering support and resources to someone she had considered an enemy just days before. Because the real enemy had never been individual students caught up in a toxic system, it was the institutional culture that had turned children into predators and victims into silent accomplices. 2 months later, Haley Morrison stood at a podium in the Connecticut State Capitol, addressing a joint session of the legislature as they debated the Riverside Reform Act, comprehensive legislation that would fundamentally change how elite private schools handled allegations of student abuse. Her hair had grown out into a stylish bob that framed her face perfectly. But more importantly, her voice had grown stronger. The scared scholarship girl who had been targeted for destruction had transformed into a confident advocate whose testimony was helping to rewrite laws that would protect students across the country. "What happened to me at Riverside Prep wasn't an isolated incident," she told the assembled lawmakers. Her words broadcast live across multiple networks. "It was the inevitable result of a system that values wealth and connections over basic human dignity. When institutions believe they're above the law, when money can buy silence and power can prevent accountability, then children suffer." She looked directly at the cameras, knowing that her words were reaching students in similar situations across the country, young people who felt powerless against institutional abuse and didn't believe their voices mattered. "But I'm here to tell you that your voice does matter. Your pain is real. Your courage can change everything. Don't let anyone convince you that staying silent is safer, because silence only protects the people who hurt you." In the audience, Susan Morrison wiped away tears of pride as she watched her daughter speak truth to power, with the kind of moral authority that couldn't be bought, inherited, or faked. Beside her sat Alexander Shen, already planning the next phase of their legal campaign against institutional abuse in elite educational settings. The Riverside Reform Act passed unanimously, establishing mandatory reporting requirements, independent oversight boards, and federal funding consequences for schools that failed to protect students from abuse. It was signed into law by the governor on a Tuesday afternoon in March. With Haley Morrison standing beside him as he put pen to paper, Brock Whitfield was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for civil rights violations, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and a lifetime ban from attending any educational institution that received federal funding. His father received a 5-year sentence for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, while Whitfield Pharmaceuticals was forced to pay $200 million in civil penalties that were distributed to victims of institutional abuse across the country. Riverside Preparatory Academy closed permanently, its assets liquidated to fund a victim compensation program, and a new public charter school focused on serving students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. The campus that had once excluded working-class families now prioritized them, with Haley Morrison serving on the founding board of directors. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was personal. Haley finished her senior year at Bridgeport Public High, where she was welcomed back as a hero by classmates who had followed her story in the national media. She graduated as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Columbia University's journalism program, and spent her gap year traveling the country to speak at schools about institutional abuse and student rights. The girl who had been targeted for destruction because she dared to excel despite her economic background had become a symbol of resistance against the kind of systematic oppression that thrived in shadows and silence. Her voice had shattered the institutional walls that protected predators, and her courage had inspired countless others to speak their own truths about abuse and injustice. On a warm evening in late May, exactly 8 months after her assault, Haley Morrison stood once again in a gymnasium, this time at Columbia University, where she was receiving the National Student Advocacy Award from the American Civil Liberties Union. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, healthy and beautiful, but she wore it proudly as a symbol of survival rather than vanity. "They cut my hair because they thought they could cut me down to size," she told the audience of students, activists, and journalists who had gathered to honor her courage. "They thought that destroying something I cared about would teach me to stay quiet and know my place. Instead, they taught me that fighting back was the only option that preserved my dignity and protected other people from suffering what I suffered." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces that included other survivors of institutional abuse who had found their voices through her example. "Your power doesn't come from staying safe or avoiding conflict. It comes from standing up for what's right, even when you're scared. It comes from refusing to let other people define your worth or limit your potential. And it comes from understanding that silence in the face of injustice isn't neutrality, it's complicity." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but the impact of her words would last a lifetime for the students who heard them. Because Haley Morrison had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon against institutional abuse wasn't money or connections or social status, it was the courage to speak truth to power and refuse to be silenced. Her story had started with scissors and cruelty, but it ended with justice and transformation. And somewhere in America, another student facing institutional abuse would see her example and find the courage to fight back, knowing that their voice mattered and their dignity was worth defending. The girl they tried to destroy had become unbreakable, and in breaking their institutional silence, she had set countless others free.